everyone. Welcome to Shadow Talkers. I'm RulyWolf, and of course, I've got MoonDog with me. And today, we have got a super interesting topic for you. MoonDog, have you heard of the USS Eldridge?
I have, but only recently, because I was not familiar with the military naval ship USS Eldridge. But what I was familiar with is what it was connected to, and that's the Philadelphia experiment. So, no, I did not know about the ship, but I did watch a movie about the Philadelphia experiment and had heard things about it.
Okay, and so for those of you who may not know what it is, so what happened was October of 1943, witnesses said that the Cannon-class destroyer, the USS Eldridge, was surrounded by a green glow, and it disappeared from the port and was seen at another port, and then shortly after was back at its original port. And when the ship reappeared, there was crew with injuries. They had, mental fog, and even more horrifyingly, there were bodies fused with the hull of the ship. And theories say that Albert Einstein actually was help leading the experiment, which was that they had created these generators that put off a special magnetic field that was supposed to help them be invisible to enemy radars, but instead made them jump from different places.
And also made them, and besides jumping, the other storyline is that the ship just went invisible and nobody
Right.
knew if it left or not. I want to interject real quick and just say the crazy part is there are so many different storylines to this. We're going to call it a conspiracy theory, because when we get into it more, you'll find out why I said that. But, you know, a naval ship is used for an experiment, which they do. That's what the military does. They try to improve and build better weaponry or defenses. And this particular time, um, supposedly the USS Eldridge was being used for a defensive type, we'll just call it weapon. But basically, um, they did something at the dock. There's also some other people who said it was just outside in the river, just not far from the dock. But whatever, it was being witnessed, and it disappeared. Whether it teleported to another location or just went invisible, it's just crazy. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, because there's so many different storylines to this thing and so much denial that it happened. You got to believe that something happened, and the military was testing something, and ultimately it went wrong.
Yeah. And so some facts on the ship to kind of give you an idea of this. So the Eldridge was commissioned in August of 1943, so just a few months before the Philadelphia experiment happened. And in June of 1946, it was actually decommissioned, which, these ships cost mass quantities of money. So it's a little odd that you would have this 3-year-old basically ship that, not even, just short of 3 years, and then sorry, I got my dates mixed up there, but it's a 3-year-old ship, and it gets decommissioned. That seems really weird. And then it gets a little bit weirder, too, because everything that MoonDog and I both encountered while looking this up is that when you just are kind of looking for the USS Eldridge, it says that it was scrapped. It was decommissioned and then scrapped. And then you dig further, and it says that it was sold to Greece, and Greece then scrapped it. But I dug even further, and I found out that, in fact, Greece actually bought the Eldridge, renamed it the HNS Leon, and it was, in parentheses, D-54. And it actually served in the Greece's Navy from 1951 to 1992. And then, again, there's a lot of things that say that it was scrapped after that. But upon further digging, I found a picture of it in 1960, which that wouldn't correlate to it being scrapped. That just, or after Greece had it, but it does correlate with Greece buying it and then using it. But I actually found on TripAdvisor there's a Greece private tour, like kind of thing, you know, and it's rated well and it has pictures. Well, one of these pictures is a Cannon class destroyer that's docked, and it's a very good modern quality picture, and it's titled USS Eldridge, now the Leon. So it kind of seems like maybe it wasn't scrapped and they're using it on tours, but that's all I could find on it. So it was really interesting how this ship should have a very clear, you know, set. Okay, it was decommissioned here, so and so had it here, and then it went to XYZ. But there's all these different stories of what happened to it.
Right.
So
Which kind of solidifies the conspiracy theory. So I want to go back a little real quick. So in 1943, this experiment was done. And I think you said it, like I said, you and I have been talking today, so maybe I missed it. But in our research, supposedly Albert Einstein was part of this magnetic field they were going to generate, and it was something new, and ultimately it was supposed to just make the ship invisible and also make it so that underwater mines could not get attached to the ship. Very benign thinking, very good thinking on a military basis. Hey, we don't want our ships blowing up, so that's a great thing. But where the whole conspiracy or the whole oddity of it comes in is when they start the experiment. And as RulyWolf said, there was this weird greenish glow that was witnessed by a whole bunch of people, and they saw it, and then the ship vanished. And again, multiple witnesses, but of course, if you go looking for those witnesses, they've kind of disappeared. And so this is where the whole conspiracy theory comes in. The truth is, there appeared to be an experiment done, and now it sounded like it failed, and failed miserably, because what the other backside of the story is a ship reappeared, and then the naval people on the ship, the sailors, were all like, some of them got massively sick. Some of them had just huge, I guess, massive headaches. They couldn't see straight. Some of them went insane. And then there's one story that one sailor, when it appeared back, was kind of on an upper deck and fell down to a lower deck and actually fused into the deck of the ship. Part of his body did. So it sounds like with this crazy experiment, somehow we're talking Star Trek teleporters or something, you know, it disappeared and came back together, and the molecules and stuff weren't quite back together, meshing properly, or who knows. It's just it's nuts. It's nuts. Let's call it nuts.
It is nuts. And something I find interesting too is that a lot of the naysayers, I guess, say that the reason that this points to being a hoax is that the ONR, which is the Office of Navy Research, wasn't even created until, I'm double checking this because I don't want to give wrong dates. There's a lot of dates in this, and it's kind of hard to not get the dates mixed up, but it's important in this one. So the Office of Naval Research wasn't founded until August of 1946. So a lot of things say that, or a lot of places say that that's just proof that it was a hoax. But to me, it feels like that situation would be the perfect reason for this government organization to be created, because they did messed up. Like, you done messed up. Yeah. Like, so I don't feel like that's a really good reason for that to be considered a hoax, because they may not have felt the need. The Navy's been around for a while, so they may not have felt the need to even worry about something like that, and then you do something really bad and you're like, oops, gotta fix it now. And that was not too long after they got rid of the Eldridge as well. It's a little
Right.
odd.
Well, it is, especially like you said, they got rid of the Eldridge so fast. Back in the 40s, I'm not sure what the cost would be, but you're probably looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to build a cannon class destroyer. And you don't, especially at that time, you just don't take a fairly new ship, within a 3-year period and quote unquote scrap it and then send it to another country and say, well, they're going to scrap it for us. And then again, the
Right.
crazy part is it didn't get scrapped and Greece used it. So that's just odd, super odd. I do want to jump back real quick. Going back to the whole magnetism thing, even if some of this is far-fetched, like somebody fusing to a deck, the ship actually disappearing, it is possible that this magnetism was so incredibly high, which it sounds like it did, like it went out of control beyond what they thought it would do. It can mess with people's brains. So people may have been getting, outside may have been getting hit by the magnetism itself. And it is possible that they, it just messed with their heads and their vision, and they would, they see this glow, and then who knows, maybe they passed out, or maybe they just weren't seeing clearly, and then maybe this, if there was this fog, a green fog, blue lights, maybe they thought it did disappear for a little bit, and it was still there. But the thing is, something happened, and it really appears like the Navy tried to cover it up. And they, if you look into it, it's so crazy. It's like they did everything they could to make this story disappear, but it didn't because too many people saw it.
Right. And something I find interesting is that in 1999, the crew of the Eldridge had their first reunion, and one of them joked that the only true part is that the crew were a little crazy. If this happened, it is classified. That's why there's no information out there. It's classified. I don't know for sure what the limitation on this is, but I'm pretty sure that if anything stays classified and you have knowledge of classified information, you go to your grave with it. So I don't, again, that's another one of those things that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a hoax, because if you have the opportunity to tell someone and, get massively in trouble or just pretend it never happened, more than likely you're going to pretend it never happened because you've been told to just shut up and sit down. So I don't think that that's another necessarily pointer to this being a hoax.
Right.
So in 1956, a man named Carlos Alland, we'll call him Alland, I'm not positive how it's pronounced. He also went by Carl Allen. He wrote to Morris K. Jessup and detailing how he saw the USS Eldridge appear in front of him out of the frog.
Frog.
Okay,
that's the other storyline. A gigantic frog. It came in and ate the ship.
So it came out of the fog, and he saw this while he was serving on the USS Buruseth. And I'm not sure how to pronounce these things. I'm doing my best. I apologize.
That's a weird name on that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, not a common name. So the first letter, which supposedly contains details on levitation, has been lost. As far as anybody can tell, they don't know where it is. If you look online, though, you can find some of the other letters from Allen to Joseph. They're very interesting. I don't know. I can't. If I were writing letters, I wouldn't write them the way he wrote them. But at the same time, I haven't seen anything crazy, so I wouldn't want to write anybody off like his letters as not credible because of the way he presents his letters. Everybody grew up differently. He may not have, gotten very good education. We don't know, and have seen people say that his letters don't sound credible. I don't think that's a fair assumption. You know, I'm sure if somebody in the 1940s saw texts from people and the OMG and LOL, like, they'd be like,
Right.
that's crazy. So I think that that's an unreasonable thing to say about Alan. Just my take on it.
With that though, that's when you go to debunk something, or not debunk, when you go to bury something, try to cover it up and everything, besides threatening people, people outside of your control, like let's say if you're a sailor, your upper command can come in and say, you better not say anything or else.
Exactly.
Now, if you get somebody from the outside, well, if they've got information, and maybe it's not all correct, but it's still got enough information that is legitimate, how do you get it so people don't listen? You have to make the person look weird. And those letters you're talking about, yeah, they, whoever they are, people were trying to make it look like he was just a crazy lunatic. I saw a little bit of his letters, and I'm like you. I didn't see anything weird. I didn't read enough of them, but it doesn't mean he's crazy. But
right.
But that's how you discredit somebody. You just simply say they're idiots. Their letters were goofy. Now, wasn't Alan the one who? Sorry, I got lots of information here on this. It's like so much information. It's nuts. I mean, for our short period of show, it's like, go look it up, but you have to dig deep, because if you don't dig deep, if you don't follow those rabbit holes, you're going to get the same information. Oh yeah, there was an experiment, supposedly it went bad, it was a green glow, and then the ship reappeared, and that's it. But there was another one, and I'm kind of confused with all the players in this. So you were talking about Alid, but then there was Al Beeklix.
Oh, yeah, I think it was Felix. And yeah, that he's a different one. He's the one that claimed him and his brother were stationed on the ship and jumped over the side before that date even took place. I think it was in August 1943. They said they jumped over the side and were transported to the year 2137. That story is a whole other.
It is weird. That one.
Can of worms.
That one I would have a hard time following or believing, because this gentleman claimed to be a time traveler, and he traveled multiple times. I can't remember the first time he jumped. But like the biggest one is that he jumped all the way to 2746 or something like that. That one's goofy, but he lived and he stayed around for a long time, talking about all this time travel and things like that. And he kind of had this little cult following. I don't know if I believe him, because everything I've read that he supposedly said, it kind of makes you wonder what's happening. But let's say him and his brother were on the ship. Let's say it did mess with his head, and either A, he just kind of went loony, and kind of lost it, or maybe he did have information and he got hauled off into a room and brainwashed. That stuff happens. I mean, come on. It's not just in the movies. So
right. Yeah, I think that my inability to necessarily fully believe his story is, he said he was watching, there's a movie, the Philadelphia Experiment, and he was watching that, and it gave him a weird feeling, and so he went and he was hypnotized, and then he realized that he was actually named Edward Cameron, and so it was him and his brother Duncan Cameron that jumped over the side of the ship, and he did all this time traveling, and because he did all this time traveling, Edward Cameron was completely taken out of the timeline. There was no longer an Edward Cameron, and so he was reborn into the body of Al Bielek. And that just seems that kind of hitting the limit of far-fetched. It's like one of those almost bad sci-fi movies that you're watching, and they throw so many things in there that you're just like, wait, hang on, I'm getting confused because they just have so much stuff. Because he said that in 2005 because he came out in 1999 or 1990, and he said that in 2005 there was going to be a big war that happened, and that it was basically going to just like wipe out governments because it was so bad and populations, and clearly that didn't happen. It's 15 years later and we're all still here and not living through that. And again, it could have changed, if he was time traveling and all of this did happen, it could have changed, and because he was traveling the timelines and stuff. It's a lot. Most of the things that you just find, again, scratching the surface, it leaves the majority of that out, and I feel like that's to fit the narrative. I don't think that we should be changing things to fit the narrative. I think we should be looking at things rationally and digging and looking for answers, but also looking at them rationally and not changing the facts to fit the narrative to make it work. So that's my opinion on that
exactly
of the story.
yeah that is an odd one, and if you have time to look into it,
yes, it's worth reading.
My personal feeling is, if he had anything, like if he really was involved, it wasn't just somebody who came out of a sideshow or something from a circus and tried to jump on the bandwagon. But again, there wasn't really a bandwagon at the time on this whole story. I mean, it got buried real quick. So that's why things kind of trickled out over time. But let's go back to Aldred, right? Correct?
Alan,
yes.
Yes.
The one
and he
thing
also
with
went
him,
by Carl Allen, too. So that was a little confusing at first.
I know.
Yeah, but
so going back to him.
Story.
That's the one who they said committed suicide.
No.
Oh, see, there's so many players in this, I get confused.
Yeah. So actually, before we jump to the next guy, we'll go ahead and wrap up a little bit with Alan. So he actually went into hiding. He was really hard to find. A lot of people wanted to talk to him and hear his story. And somebody finally found him in 1986. And living in Colorado, and they did an interview with him, and he maintained his story that everything happened, and but he was older and didn't have a lot of money. It was kind of a sad story. If you can find it, it's the News at Colorado Centennial Country, and it was 1986. If you can find that article, somebody tried to type it up as neatly as they could, and it's really interesting. But he did maintain his story the last he heard of it. He kind of did mention that he was laying low, which makes sense. I'd want to lay low too. That's quite the claim, especially when it's could potentially be something that's classified. So check that out. But what you are thinking of Morris K. Jessup.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so why don't you say something about him?
Okay. So he actually received letters from Alan, and those were the letters I was talking about earlier. And in 1957, Jessup was actually contacted by the ONR. They had received a copy of his book, The Case for the UFO, with notes written in 3 different handwritings, and one of them is supposedly an alien handwriting. Not like language-wise, but just odd. And so Jessup actually believed that Alan wrote the notes in the book, that somehow he was tied to it and he sent it to the ONR. And for whatever reason, the ONR, which was the Office of Navy Research, they kept the book and then eventually ended up publishing 127 copies of The Case for the UFO, but with the handwritten notes also copied in. And they dubbed it the Varro editions because the publisher was Varro Manufacturing.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you are interested in reading the handwritten notes, which detail a lot of things, definitely try and see if you can find a copy of the Varro editions, which, I mean, it's going to be kind of hard. There are only 127 copies made. So On April 19th, 1959, Jessup contacted Dr. Manson Valentine and arranged to meet with him the next day. He said that he had made a breakthrough in the Philadelphia experiment. But on April 20th, 1959, so the day before, the day that he was supposed to meet, the day he was supposed to meet with Dr. Valentine, he was found dead and with a hose from a car exhaust pipe in his back window of his car, and so it filled with toxic fumes. They said that he died by suicide, which there are stories out there of his friends saying he'd been suicidal, but then there are also stories of people saying he wasn't suicidal, so that's a really complicated one. I do believe, though, that generally most people who intend to commit suicide don't get excited about something and say, hey, let's meet up, I have to tell you about this, and then commit suicide and just leave it.
Exactly. Well, and that's what I want to bring up is this is that typical, somebody says they have information, it's important information, whether it's for the good guys or the bad guys, and then the person dies by suicide. I just want to call baloney because like you said, RulyWolf, some people said that, oh yeah, he was suicidal. You know what? It's so easy to put a narrative out there. If you're trying to stop somebody and you got to snuff them, it's like you got to get information out there to dissuade the general public, because remember, the general public tends to just feed on what they hear because sometimes it's like gossip. Oh, hey, I heard this, that he was suicidal.
Exactly.
And so I know he was suicidal, so I'm going to say he's suicidal. Hope you like my imitation of just a general public. But the thing is that, okay, RulyWolf, you're absolutely correct, and I'm the same way. You don't sit there and say, hey, I'm going to meet up with you. I've got something. I've got to show you this, and then snuff yourself. It doesn't work that way. Oh, yeah, I'm going to stick a hose on my tailpipe, stick it in my car, and just put myself out because I'm mad because this guy said he would meet with me, and I could show him my information.
Right.
Baloney.
And something interesting, too, is that there was nothing ever said about, oh, yes, and this was the research found. That portion of it was just gone. So I don't know why that there wouldn't be some of this. Oh, and his notes were found and it said this.
Yeah. I mean, the tough part is, does he have any information? I don't know. Nobody really has any solid evidence to show that this happened. But the fact is that people are out there and digging around, or were out there digging around. I mean, they made a movie in 1984 about it. It's not just because it's just a good story. Oh, which, by the way, at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, plug your ears. La 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 la. When we talked about people fuse, one of the things is, beside the story where I told you where one sailor fell off a top deck and kind of fused into the deck. And there's different ways. I mean, like if the deck was super hot from the magnetism or something, and the metal actually started to melt, and you fell down into it as it was starting to cool, yeah, you could get stuck to it. It would be gnarly bad.
Oh,
but there's another story, and you can see pictures out there people have doctored. I haven't seen anything that looks legit, of sailors. I'm sorry, not people, sailors stuck into the ship. Like one guy's half sticking out of a masthead or something, or it's not a masthead. I don't know which. Sorry, I'm not a naval person, so I do apologize. Another one's got an arm sticking out, and things like that. The one I saw was hilarious because it does look ominous, but whoever did it, they got the shadows wrong. So you've got two suns or something up in the sky casting two different shadows in different directions, and then there's some fog where you can't even really see it real well. So shame on those people for doing that. I mean, although if you call it artistic work, whatever, but I went off track. But the thing is it's I'm losing it. Take over.
Okay, all right. So I want to say that the whole thing was really interesting because so we actually tried recording this once before and decided that it wasn't our best and we wanted to do better. Plus we had the most technical problems ever.
Oh my gosh.
My
Yep.
screen was turning like first it was like had this weird blue overlay, so we stopped and we tried again. It had this green overlay, and MoonDog's monitor just stopped working out of nowhere. Like all of this stuff is happening when we're trying to record it, and it was just awful. And so when we initially, so I decided to do more research because I had more time. And so initially I was having the hardest time finding information, and I found out you had to like pick it apart. You have to, okay, so you have the Eldridge, and then you got to like dig into what happened to the Eldridge, and then you have Alan, and so then you got to dig into Alan, and you have to dig into each single person to expound upon it. It's not like Bigfoot where you just look at Bigfoot and it just takes you down all these other places and you have all this information. And so this was a really interesting one to do, and I think that whether it's a hoax or not, it's an extremely interesting story. And if it's not a hoax, then it's classified and they're not going to let that out. Not until there's something that happens that they can be like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's happened. Yeah, it did happen. Because, they've done that. That's just the way government works.
Well, because people have to protect themselves. Like, again, I'm sure nobody intended anything to happen bad to people, but if it did, they got to bury it. You can't let that get out in the public.
Oh, absolutely not, because that was a terrible time for that to come out. On top of it, just incident, you've got a lot going on in the world, and then you have this horrific incident happen. It would have caused mass hysteria. People would have freaked out. This is the 1940s. They don't have cell phones and, iPads and social media. Things are a lot different then. And so, it just would be a lot harder to have dealt with than on top of it just being a horrific incident.
Well, see, this is why I like the movie 1984. It starts off just like, a normal day for a sailor getting on a ship. And it seemed like they made it act like that the sailors kind of knew there was an experiment going on, but nobody was concerned about it. Then they took you into the ship and you see these weird pieces of equipment, and then they fire it up, and everybody's like, okay, this is cool, and humming and whirling and lights flickering, and then it goes out of control. And that's when you do the movie really kicks in, and they get teleported into the 1980s, which is fun. If you like the 80s stuff, it was fun seeing them run around and all the 80s things that you could see back then. And then at the very end, this is here's a spoiler alert. I was going on that I went off track. Yeah, so spoiler alert, but I kind of gave it away at the end. They do show real quick, but they do it in such a way they're not saying, oh my word, look at that, what the heck happened? They're all like, happy music, we're back home, the ship's back home, and they're walking by and there's all these sailors fused into the ship. I'm like,
just walking by.
So it's like, yeah, whoever directed it or produced it said, we're going to keep this just to the side, that like, hey, this happened, but we're not going to point it out, but if you see it, you'll know what we're talking about. So that's where I went off track when I was talking about the other thing. So it's a good movie. For me, I just want to say this, my little quick movie review. It was fun watching the 80s movie because that's when they filmed it. The second part is, I'm not a big fan of chase fans, and this is a chase movie because they're trying to find a couple sailors who got sucked into it was like the two brothers jumping off the ship. Mm-hmm. They're taking from that. They jump off the ship or fell off, and then they get sucked into a time warp and pulled into the 1980s. So, again, fun movie to watch. But, again, somebody's making a movie and showing this. That means you got to believe something's out there, or something did happen, is what I mean.
Right. So. And I think, too, with anything, you have to try and look at it with a reasonable eye. You shouldn't have a state of suspended disbelief for things. just because you want it to be real, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I know this doesn't feel real, but I want this story to work, and so you're making it work, kind of how I feel right now. I can't remember the name. Kind of like Al Bielek. You kind of have that, you know, watching the movie in this state of suspended disbelief while you're watching it, and then you've watched the movie, so now you kind of feel like maybe you were part of it. There has to be a healthy amount of you analyze it with a rational mind, and then you let some things in to complete the story without going overboard, to make the narrative complete. Because when you make it go overboard, it becomes unbelievable, and it turns into, oh, well, this was a hoax, it didn't happen. And I do think that if that's the case, that it's not a hoax, but you know, this information is being put out there, it's probably being put out there on purpose to make it sound like a hoax so that people don't believe it, so it can stay quiet. But you have to be careful with your brain when you're looking through things to make sure you don't get overexcited and let it blow out of proportion so that it does become unbelievable. That's my personal opinion.
Well, here's another one too, because you get, like you had said, in 1943, the communication level was so minimal. You know, not like today where something spreads so fast. In fact, you don't put anything online that you don't want to get out there because it's probably permanently online forever. They didn't have that. So when something happened, it was word of mouth. So some of it could have been changed by word of mouth. You know, people tend to want notoriety, and maybe that's what this guy did. He just didn't feel like he was out in the public and wanted, you know, he didn't have TikTok to do a little funny dance and try to get himself out there. But let's say what if he was paid by the government to do it? What if too many people decided they were looking into it, and they paid him and said, you need to get out there and just go so kookamatoo with your story that people are going to think this is all a hoax. I mean, this was so convoluted. I mean, I'm going to look into it even more when I'm done because it's crazy. I mean, it's like, I think there's so many narratives, so many storylines, so many rabbit holes, and trying to keep it all together is just nuts. It's a definitely 100% conspiracy theory. Something happened. What really happened, who knows? Did it get blown out of proportion, or did they bury it and then put out false narratives to get people to turn away from it? But the fact that there's still even articles being written even nowadays about it makes you think something happened, at least in my opinion.
Especially with how little it's out there. It's not as prevalent as you think it would be. It takes quite a bit of digging in. A lot of the things that I was finding initially was on like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not the most reliable place for information, so I really work hard not to take information from there. I might get an idea from there and then research into it further. But when I give information, I don't ever use things like Wikipedia because I want to be as credible as possible. And when you look for this, those are the sites that pop up, which just helps kind of perpetuate that this is a hoax.
Right.
So you have to research it.
You do. I want to go back to Jessup real quick because, again, there's so much information with these people. I probably said that 1,000 times. I apologize. But Jessup, the other thing is he was a UFOologist, which they didn't call him that back then. Basically, if you believed in UFOs and talked about it, you were a nutcase. So remember this. In 1940, or Jessup, forget it. I'm not even talking about it. 1950s, he was going on about it, and they're writing him off. Oh, he believes in UFOs. He's crazy. Well, what about now? Oh, didn't the Navy just come out a couple of years ago, a year or two ago, saying, oh, yeah, UFOs are real. We have information. And then, I don't know if any of you heard recently, now they're backpedaling. Oh, yeah, no, we didn't say that. There's no information about UFOs. Give me a break. So how do you say this didn't happen when information gets dug up and then they try to just slander and destroy somebody publicly, and then he just happens to commit suicide? I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody who looks into UFOs and believes in it, is tracking it, then tracks this information and has information. I don't think Jessup killed himself. It's too
I'm inclined not to think so either.
Think of it this way: if you have a criminal case, like against the mob, and people were disappearing, the day before they're supposed to go to trial and go testify against the mob, they disappeared, or they were found dead. Oh yeah, he killed himself. Yeah, Guido, did he kill himself? I saw him, man. I swear, you saw him over there. He was just sitting there smoking a cigarette. Also, he took a tailpipe, or a hose to his tailpipe, and started smoking that instead. I'm just saying, man. I don't know, man. I think you got to let the guy go now. It's like, it's like goofy. It's like, come on. But the masses tend to follow this information. It's a psychological thing. Can you put it out there when somebody thinks, they know something, so they're going to go with it, instead of saying, "Wait a minute, that's baloney."
Right. It's easier to feel safe than to feel panic or scared. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, true. You're absolutely correct. But
anyhow,
this has been fun. I got to say, if you have time, look into it. Even today before the show, I was going through story after story, and that's why it kind of gets a little convoluted, but it's like with the players, and it's like, man, there's so much information out there, but you don't hear about it. It's just like nothing. When I believe it really was something. And sailors, it appears, did get hurt, whether it was just psychologically, or they went mad or whatever. Super sad. Super sad. And if they physically were hurt, getting stuck into a hull because it overheated, I mean, that's, just physics. It's very possible. It's sad that it got buried, because it should have been put out there to honor those people and say, hey, you know what? We just had something go bad. We were trying to do the right thing. It went wrong. Why bury it? Unless it did more than just turn green and hurt people. Maybe it did teleport. So who knows?
Yep. Maybe someday we'll know.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Probably not.
Right.
It's Ark of the Covenant, or the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where all this information got pushed into a warehouse that's just massive, and it's buried far away.
Probably.
All right, Ruly. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening to and watching our show. Let us know in the comments what you think. If you have any other information that we missed here about the Philadelphia experiment in the USS Eldridge, let us know. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. And check us out on Instagram at Shadow Talkers. And until next time, explore the shadows.